Brief history of the early immigration to the United States reveals prejudice, hostility, and blatant discrimination against the people of Asia. Please throw light on the problems which Indians faced when they came to America.
Indians started coming to America at the beginning of the 20th century in search of economic opportunities. There was abundance of jobs in lumber industry in Washington and Oregon states, and plenty of farming jobs in Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Imperial Valleys of California. But the new immigrant found only menial jobs in factories, lumber mills, and farms the white workers would not do. The employers preferred Indians for their willingness to do any and all kinds of work at low wages. The labor unions did not like the Indian laborers as they were competing against the white union workers. As the number of Indian workers increased with a span of few years, they started facing discrimination and hostility. Indian concentration in a few small communities, particularly several with turban, drew high level of visibility and provoked hostility from the organization, the Asiatic Exclusion League, which carried propaganda against quote-unquote the tide of turbans and the Hindu invasion of America. As Indian workers were paid low wages, they could only afford to live in shanty structures. White workers feared that these low-paid Indian workers would displace them from their job and bring wages down. Their festering hostility and pent-up frustration manifested in violence against Indians, vandalism in their belongings, and hatred for their religion, lifestyle, and culture. The union leaders warned the mill owners that after Labor Day, September 2, 1907, Indians should not be employed in lumber mills or anywhere in Bellingham. Subsequently, on September 4, 1907, around 400 to 500 white people of Asian Exclusion League attacked Indian dwellings. They smashed windows and pulled the Indians out of their beds. Panicked, some Indians escaped from their apartment just in their night clothes, while others jumped out of the building and hurting themselves in the process. The rioters went on rampage from mill to mill, finding as many Indian workers as they could. They rounded up about 200 workers, brandishing clubs jubilantly.
This amounted to complete lawlessness. Was no police protection provided to Indians who were subject to such hostility?
Indians became victims of prejudice, hostility, and violence. Some were injured, several lost their belongings, all experienced bigotry and suffered humiliation. The police force of Bellingham comprised of 7 people only. They protected them during the night, but the nightmare of brutality and vindictiveness forced traumatized Indian workers to leave Bellingham in search of safe haven. Some Indians stayed for one extra day to get their wages from mill owners. Some mill owners refused to pay their legitimate wages. Within a few days, all Indians left unfriendly city. Indians were British subjects, but the British Indian ambassador did not care to ask the American government for compensation for injuries or loss of property of the Indian workers. Some of the Indian mill workers went to Everett, another town 60 miles from Bellingham, to work in the sawmills there. 2 months later, in November 1907, several Americans attacked Indians, robbed them, and destroyed their belongings even there. Indians were forced to leave Everett. In 1908, about 100 Indians were driven from Live Oak, a town near Yuba City, California. In March 1910, white lumbermen forced Indian workers to leave St. John, Oregon. The Asiatic Exclusion League and the labor unions used violence against Indians as an effective method to exclude the Indian workers from jobs and residential communities. They also kept pressure on elected officials and politicians who in 1917 succeeded in getting an immigration law passed by the United States Congress over the veto of President Woodrow Wilson. The new law prohibited immigration from virtually all of Asia except Japan. Indians had come to America in search of a better life for themselves and their families and worked even at menial jobs. They could never have anticipated that America, considered the best among civil societies, had people full of meanness, malice and ill will against different looking people. The white laborers, encouraged by the labor unions, perpetrated unparalleled heinous crimes against innocent and law-abiding Indians who had come with a dream of a better life, but unfortunately, Bellingham became the burial place for their dreams.
Indians in America were working as laborers. How did they think of freeing India from British rule?
In the first decade of 20th century, Indian workers had started facing discrimination and hostility from white workers and their unions. Even students from India faced discrimination as they were not able to get jobs commensurate with their qualifications upon graduation. They attributed the racial prejudice and discrimination to their being nationals of India. They were determined to fight for freedom for their motherland. They formed organizations collectively assert their birthright to independence of India. Some students advocated armed rebellion against the British rule to achieve independence. Taraknath Das began publishing Free Hindustan magazine in 1907 in Seattle. Hardyal, who had come from England after relinquishing his government scholarship at Oxford University, started Vande Mataram in 1909, communicating his revolutionary ideas to the students. In the United States, Hardyal had been faculty member at Stanford. He inspired many students and channelized anti-British sentiments of the students for independence of India. On April 23, 1913, in a meeting in Astoria, Oregon, of some of the patriotic Indians, Hindustan Association of Pacific Coast was formed, with a major objective to liberate India with a force of arms from the British colonialism. Son Singh Pakna was elected president while Hardyal became general secretary. Punjabis supported its objectives wholeheartedly, became its members enthusiastically and supported it financially. The Hindustan Association began publishing a magazine called Gadar to promote the aims, objectives and activities of the organization. Gadar literally means revolt or mutiny. In a short period of time, Gadar magazine became a symbol of political consciousness of the overseas Indians. The British government tried to suppress Gadar movement and hired agents to penetrate the Gadar party and watch their activities. At the behest of British, the American government arrested Lala Hardyal on March 1914, but later released him on bail. Hardyal jumped the bail and left for Switzerland, from where he went on to Germany. Soon after formation of Gadar party, World War I broke out in August 1914. The Gadarites started campaign to mobilize the overseas Indians, particularly Punjabis in Canada and the United States, and to inspire them to go to India to launch revolution. Hundreds of Gadarites hurried homeward for rebellion and overthrow the British government in India, and that's how all this started, the freedom fight.
Gadarites were not trained fighters. How did they even come to think of taking on the force of the British India Army?
On reaching India, the Gadarites drew plans to infiltrate the Indian army. Since many Gadarites were retired military soldiers, they tried to infiltrate into various units of the armed forces, established contacts with their colleagues still working in the armed forces, and incited them to revolt and become part of the rebellious force to liberate India. They excited the soldiers to fight not for the British but against the British Empire and free India from the shackles of British imperialism. The irony of the valiant effort was that while the Gadarites had gone to India to fight for the freedom of their motherland, the Indian leadership in India openly cooperated with the British. It was rude shock to the Gadar leaders to see the Indian freedom fighters cooperating with the British government in their war efforts. The traitors of the Gadar movement leaked out the secret plans to British authorities. Thus, the plans of the Gadarites were foiled and their dreams to see Mother India liberated from the British slavery came to practically nothing. Many Gadarites were taken captives. They were prosecuted. 48, including Kartar Singh Sraba, Vishnu Ganesh Pingle, were hanged to death. 69, including Son Singh Pakna, were put behind bars for life, and several others were given varying terms of imprisonment. The Gadar movement was a saga of courage, valor, and determination of overseas Indians to free India from the shackles of British slavery. Although the movement did not achieve the intended objective, nevertheless it awakened a sleeping India and left a major impact on India's struggle for freedom. The heroism, courage and sacrifices of the Gadarites inspired many freedom fighters to continue their mission of freeing India. 16 years later, in 1930, the Indian National Congress at its Lahore session on December 19, 1929, adopted a resolution of complete independence of India as its ultimate goal. The Congress adopted the tricolor flag on December 31, 1929 and unfurled it on January 26, 1930. Every year we celebrate this day, January 26, as India's Republic Day.
What happened to India's independence movement in America after the failure of the Gadar movement?
Gadar movement, there were many Indians in America who had the burning desire to liberate India, but they abandoned the revolutionary approach of the Gadarites and started educating public figures and winning support of prominent Americans like Pearl Buck, Louis Fisher and many others. They relentlessly advocated India's right to be free from British colonialism. Lala Lajpat Rai, one of the prominent leaders of India's freedom movement, came to the US in December 1914 to elicit American support for India's freedom movement. He tried to reach the American people but encountered resistance in getting his letters and articles published in newspapers and magazines. In 1916, he published his book Young India, an interpretation and a history of the national movement from within. He founded the Indian Home Rule League in 1917 in New York, and in 1918 started publishing monthly magazine Young India. He also started publishing articles in American media, made contacts with intellectuals, and gained the support of wider audience of Americans sympathetic towards cause of India's freedom. But he had to leave for India in 1920, and unfortunately, neither the League nor the magazine Young India survived after his departure. Dalip Singh South, who in 1956 was the first Asian to be elected to the US Congress, used the platform of his position as the national president of the student body, which was called Hindustan Association of Americans, expound on India's freedom of the self-government. After he completed his PhD in UC Berkeley, he moved to the Imperial Valley of California, where he continued to speak about India's right for self-rule. He also started Indian Association of America and raised funds from California Sikh farmers for lobbying efforts in the United States Congress in Washington DC for India and Indian causes.
Could you also please tell us about other Indians in America who got involved in this movement?
Mubarak Ali Khan, who had become a successful farmer in Arizona, founded the Indian Welfare League in 1937 and gained considerable support for India's independence. Dr. Haridas Mazmudar came to America in 1920 for higher education. He undertook nationwide speaking tour on the freedom struggle in India under Mahatma Gandhi's leadership. By 1932, he had published 4 volumes of India Today and Tomorrow. Syed Hussain co-founded the National Committee for India's Independence with Anup Singh. He travelled extensively and advocated Gandhian approach to gaining independence for India. Anup Singh earned his PhD in political science from Harvard University in 1935. He became very active in New York-based India League of America, headed by J.J. Singh, and in 1944 moved to Washington DC to start National Committee for India's Independence. He published a monthly magazine, Voice of India, to disseminate the message of India's independence movement. J.J. Singh, a successful merchant in New York, constructed Indian League of America, started by Lala Lajpat Rai, and in 1939 became its president. He started the League's mouthpiece, India Today, an informative monthly bulletin. He also expanded its membership base to include Americans, including Nobel Prize winner Arthur Pearl Buck, who was honorary president in 1944. For practical purposes, J.J. Singh had become an unofficial lobbyist for India, Indians, and India's independence movement. He convinced significant sections of the American public that the time had come for India to be liberated. Indian community activists J.J. Singh, Anup Singh, Haridas Mazmudar, Taraknath Das, and Syed Hussain, and some others had tremendous enthusiasm and abundant energy and used it all for the cause of India's freedom. They used their writings, speeches, and meetings with elected officials and people of influence to gain sympathy, support, and endorsement of the American people for the independence of India. For many years, the community activists played the role of Indian community emancipators in the United States, forgetting the legacy of their crucial role in the struggle for India's independence. would be losing an anchor with the past.
The Komagata Maru incident remains one of the most talked about anti-Indian incidents, and it coincided with the Gadar movement. What can you tell us about it?
Komagata Maru incident is one of the many incidences in the early 20th century in which Asian exclusionary laws in Canada and the United States were used to exclude immigrants of Asian origin. The incident resonates till today. Indians in Canada were very unhappy with the new regulations which had been put into force in 1908 preventing Indian immigrants to Canada. An enterprising and resourceful Indian in Singapore, Gurdeep Singh, chartered a Japanese vessel Komagata Maru to circumvent the Canadian exclusionary regulations and brought 376 passengers, 346, 24 Muslims and 12 Hindus, all British subjects. In May 1914, the Canadian government refused disembarking of the ship at Vancouver. The Indian community in Canada was outraged, rallied in support of the passengers and brought legal recourse. After a 2-month legal wrangling, only 24 passengers were allowed to immigrate to Canada, and the ship was forced to sail back to Baji, Calcutta, India on July 23, 1914. The action of the Canadian government created bitterness, frustration and vengefulness not only among the passengers but also among the Indian people in Canada and the USA. Before Komagata Maru reached India, British authorities had enacted a new law, Ingress into India Ordinance, on September 5, 1914, which empowered the Punjab government to check the people entering India. The government was also empowered to confine their movements to their villages or imprison them without trial. On reaching Baji harbour near Calcutta on September 29, 1914, the British Indian government warned to transport the incoming passengers to Punjab, while most of the passengers wanted to stay and find employment in Calcutta. When the arriving passengers refused to board the special train for Punjab, the police opened fire on them, resulting in the death of 19 passengers. The police also arrested over 200 passengers and put them in prison. The brutal treatment of the returning passengers generated a wave of resentment against the British government. The Komagata Maru incident encouraged new converts to the Gadar movement, not only from North America but Indians from all over the world, and gave impetus to the Gadar movement. Some of the passengers of the ship also turned Gadarites themselves.
Please tell us about the Hindu-German conspiracy.
British government could not tolerate the popularity of Gadar movement among overseas Indians. After World War I, Britain started pressuring the United States government to suppress Gadar party activities in the United States. American authorities, however, were not fully convinced to act against Ghadarites as they were not in violation of any US law. After the start of World War in August 1914, several Ghadar party leaders, including President Som Singh Pakna and hundreds of Ghadarites, left for India to liberate their motherland from the British. But by February 1915, the Ghadar movement had collapsed in India. America joined the Allies, Britain, France and Russia on April 6, 1917 to fight the World War I against Germany. The British government claimed that the continuation of Ghadar activities on American soil and Germany's helping Ghadarites violated the neutrality laws of America. The Americans arrested 105 people of various nationalities, including several Indians. However, only 35 people, 17 Indians, 9 Germans and 9 Americans were tried for conspiracy. The trial commenced in District Court in San Francisco on November 20th, 1917 and lasted until April 24, 1918. Over 100 witnesses from around the world were brought to testify. The judge found 15 Indians and 16 German and others guilty of violating the neutrality law of the United States. On April 30th, 1918, Indians were sentenced to serve from 22 months to 60 days in various prisons in America. Hindu-German conspiracy trial cost $3 million, described as the longest and most expensive trial in American legal history till that time. The US cost was estimated to be $450,000, while Britain spent over $2.5 million. The British authorities hope that the conviction of the Indian would result in their deportation to India after their release from jail. After deportation to India, the British could try them and give them death sentence or life imprisonment as they did with other Ghadarites. Deportation proceedings were started against some Ghadar leaders after their release from jail. However, due to relentless work by some community activists, particularly by Friends of Freedom for India, formed in 1918 by Agnes Smedley and Shailendra Ghosh, deportation proceedings were stopped and lives of those Ghadar heroes were saved.
We understand that Indians in the early part of the 20th century faced much discrimination and were denied citizenship of America due to the racial policies prevalent at the time. Please talk us through this.
Americans were European ancestry, so there was no need for laws to regulate immigration from Europe. However, when the Asians started arriving, the US passed Naturalization Act of 1870 that denied Asians the right to become naturalized citizens. The new law was the first piece of discriminatory legislation against the people of Asia passed in the US Congress. The US citizenship conferred many political and social rights, but only Caucasian immigrants were eligible to apply. Some Indians considered to be Caucasian obtained US citizenship from 1908 to 1923 in different states. In 1923, the US Supreme Court decided that Indians, though Caucasians, were not white and were not eligible for US citizenship. The Supreme Court decision had demoralized effect on many Indian nationals. The economic impact of Indians was devastating as they had to liquidate their land holdings at dramatically low prices. Indians continued to seek ways to regain citizenship rights, particularly when Chinese had to be granted such rights through education. It was a major task to convince some congressmen to introduce a bill of Congress for the grant of US citizenship to a handful of Indians, about 2,000 or possibly 2,500 Indians. J.J. Singh of India League of America, Mubarak Ali Khan of the Indian Welfare League, Anup Singh, Haridas Mazumdar, Tarak Nath Das, and from California, Dalip Singh Sound of the India Association of America led the lobbying effect. They were able to successfully convince Connecticut Republican Congresswoman Claire Luce and New York Democrat Congressman Emanuel Sello, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, to jointly introduce a bill in Congress. However, convincing majority of the congressmen to pass the bill was an uphill task. For 4 years, the bill languished in the congressional committees, and Indians continued running into obstacles in finding a powerful ally to push it through Congress. President Roosevelt wrote letters to congressmen and senators, but some die-hard members of Congress and the American Federation of Labor would not relent in their opposition.
I keep in touch with my roots by indulging myself in all aspects of the Indian culture, including food, watching the movies. In fact, when I was younger, every summer my parents would take my sister and I to visit India, where we would see all our relatives and we'd get to partake in the beauty of the country. And it was truly amazing. Not only did we visit India, but every year my grandfather heads and organizes multiple functions that include a large part of the Indian community in Southern California. And I, along with my parents, personally volunteer at almost all of these events. And it's truly amazing to see the entire community and partake in the beautiful culture. So the Indian American Heritage Foundation every year conducts an organization in which they grant scholarships to high school graduates based on merit. Now, some of this merit is calculated on how well they do on a test about India. So these graduates have to learn about different aspects of India, including the history, the food, the languages, the wildlife, and it really encompasses a lot of aspects about their origin. So not only does this organization help fund high school graduates' future plans, but they also make sure that they keep in touch with the roots and their origin.
Eventually, the racial interpretation of the word Caucasian was reversed and the Luce-Sellar Bill helped Indians to get citizenship. Kindly elaborate on this, please.
In 1946, President Truman took special interest in its passage, and the Luce-Sellar Bill was enacted into the Immigration Act of 1946, conferring the rights of citizenship on the natives of India. President Truman invited some prominent Indians, Sardar J.J. Singh, President of the India League, and Dr. Anup Singh to the White House and signed the bill on July 2nd, 1946, which truly should be celebrated as the Independence Day by Indians in America. It was a great triumph for the Indian community that their relentless struggle for 23 years reversed the Supreme Court's racial interpretation of the word Caucasian. We should salute J.J. Singh, Mubarak Ali Khan, Dr. Anup Singh, Haridas Mazmudar, Tarknath Das, Dalip Singh San and others who collectively guard us rights of US citizenship. Grant of citizenship rights opened new opportunities for Indian nationals. They could leave our own land which previously they could not under the Asiatic exclusionary laws. They could take part in an election or even run for public office. They could go back for a visit to India or bring their spouses and minor children to the US. There was no more a bar on an Indian marrying an American citizen. Indians could immigrate legally up to 100 people annually and acquire US citizenship. Since the passage of the Luce-Seller Bill in 1946, American immigration laws have been modified several times. The new laws have brought waves of Indian immigrants who were educated and skilled. The last 50 years have seen exponential growth in the number of Indian immigrants, and the wave of new arrivals still goes unabated. Indians in America experienced bigotry, encountered discrimination, and suffered humiliation, and went through a long and painful struggle for parity, equality, and dignity until they gained the right of citizenship. Each individual faced unexpected and utterly harsh challenges, but gradually discovered new possibilities and realized that his or her own dreams that contributed to a brighter future for them and their children. They eventually found their earthly paradise, the United States of America.
I belong to several organizations, Indian organizations, and I went and specialized in diabetes. So I go and give lectures on diabetes and Indian diet, how to manage diabetes with Indian food, which is very high in carbohydrates. So I also belong to organizations where they celebrate India Independence Day every year, and I am quite active in the health fair. This is a free health fair that is provided to people.
Please talk us through philanthropy by Indian Americans in the US.
The United States, as per Forbes 2018 list, has 585 billionaires. Indian Americans are only 10 in the list, and none of them is in the list of top 200. Still, the community contributes $1 billion to charity. Ramesh Wadhwani, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and philanthropist with his net worth of $3.1 billion, committed to give away 80% of his wealth to charitable causes. Dr. Kiran C. Patel and his wife Dr. Pallavi Patel has gifted 240 million. Chandrika and Ranjan Tandon have donated 100 million to New York University School of Engineering. There are several more who have donated for projects in America, and several have endowed chairs in various American universities.
Likewise, please throw some light on their charity in India.
First generation Indian Americans are emotionally attached to India and constantly make efforts to reconnect with their Indian roots. Dr. Kumar Buhalian donated $20 million for hospital in Kerala. Raj Soin established a non-profit hospital in Haryana in memory of his father. Victor Menzies, retired senior vice chairman of Citigroup, donated $3 million to IIT Bombay. Prabhakant Sinha donated 2 million to his alma mater, IIT Kharagpur. Frank Islam gave donation of 2 million to Aligarh Muslim University. There are numerous examples of Indian Americans who have donated $1 million or more for causes in India dear to their hearts. Several people believe that their act of philanthropy keep them connected with their community back home. They donate for renovation of temples, upgrading of school buildings, and construction of sports arenas.
The presence of Indians in the political arena since the days of Judge Dilip Singh Sond is on the rise. Please give us an overview.
For the first time, 5 Indian Americans are serving in the US Congress. Indian Americans Ro Khanna, Pramila Jayapal, Raja Krishna Murthy and Kamala Harris were elected to the United States Congress first time in 2016, while Amy Bera won the re-election to a third term. Judge Dilip Singh Sond became the first Asian American to be elected to the Congress in 1956. Bobby Jindal, who is a Republican from Louisiana, was elected from Louisiana nearly 4 decades later. In 2007, he was elected governor of the state of Louisiana. Nikki Haley was elected to the state legislature in South Carolina. Then she became a governor in 2010 for South Carolina. Currently, she is serving as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, appointed by President Trump. Other Indian Americans in high-level positions in Trump administration include Seema Verma, who is the head of the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services, Ajit Pai, who is chairman of U.S. Federal Communications Commission, and previous administrations also has appointed several Indian Americans to high-level positions.
How about the other Indian American achievers across various walks?
4 Indian Americans have been conferred the Nobel Prize. They include Hargobind Khurana, Subramanian Chandrasekhar, Amartya Sen, Venkatraman Ramakrishnan, and then the legends astronauts Kalpana Chawla and Sunita Williams. In the business and corporate space, we have the likes of Ajay Banga, President of CEO of MasterCard, Ajit Jain, President of Berkshire Hathaway, Amar Bose, founder of Bose Corporation, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google Incorporated, Indra Nui, Chairman of and CEO of Pepsi Cola, Sabir Bhatia, who co-founded Hotmail, Renu Khator, President of University of Houston, and others.
Indian spiritual masters and yogis have influenced America in a big way. Kindly comment.
Swami Vivekananda's famous address in Chicago at the Parliament of the World's Religion in 1893 took America by storm. In 1920, Paramahansa Yogananda came to address a conference in Boston. He made America his home and spread the message of Kriya Yoga to the West. His 1946 book, Autobiography of a Yogi, remains a spiritual classic till this day. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi popularized transcendental meditation among Americans with the stress-filled life of the mid-20th century America. Swami A.C. Bhakta Vedanta Prabhupada set up America's first temple of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, that is ISKCON. Yogi Bhajan in 1969 established the 3HO Foundation to further his missionary work. Osho remained another major influence on Americans in more recent times. The likes of Baba Ramdev and Shri Shri Ravi Shankar have touched the psyche of Americans.